I found out at a gala where they were honoring my miraculous survival. Photos of me as a child with a shaved head. She'd shaved it herself. $2.3 million raised over 15 years. I never had a single tumor. She'd been poisoning me just enough to keep me sick, just enough to keep the donations coming. The detective's face when I handed him my real medical records. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. My name is Celeste Monroe, and I'm 27 years old. For the first 22 years of my life, I believed I was a cancer survivor. I believed my mother was a hero who had saved me. I believed the scars on my body and the gaps in my memory were the price of survival. I was wrong about all of it. Let me take you back to the night everything changed. October 14th, 3 years ago. The grand ballroom of the Peabody Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, $500 a plate dinners. The annual fundraising gala for the Celeste Light Foundation. The charity my mother had built in my name. I was wearing a blue silk dress my mother had picked out. My hair was finally long again, past my shoulders after years of being too sick to grow it. I was seated at the head table next to my mother, Vivian Monroe, the founder and executive director of the foundation. She was radiant in emerald green, accepting praise from donors like a queen receiving tribute. 15 years, the MC announced from the podium. 15 years of hope. 15 years of fighting. And tonight we celebrate the young woman who inspired it all. Celeste Monroe, childhood leukemia survivor, living proof that miracles happen. The crowd applauded. A spotlight found me. I smiled the way I'd been trained to smile since I was 7 years old. Then they started the slideshow. Photos of me at age 5, bald and pale, hooked up to and for in a hospital bed. Photos of me at 7 wearing a pink bandana, blowing out birthday candles. Photos of me at 10, gaunt and hollow-eyed, accepting a giant check from a local business. Photo after photo of a sick child, a dying child, a child who needed the world's help to survive. I watched myself on that screen. I watched my childhood play out in images of suffering, and something in my brain started to itch. I remember being sick. I remembered the hospital visits, the needles, the constant nausea. I remembered my mother holding my hand while doctors ran tests. I remembered being too weak to play with other children, too fragile to go to school, too ill to have a normal life. But I didn't remember the diagnosis. I didn't remember a single doctor ever saying the word leukemia to me. The slideshow ended. My mother stood up to give her speech, the same speech she'd given every year for 15 years. When Celeste was diagnosed at age 4, the doctors gave her a 20% chance of survival. But we fought. We prayed. And with the help of this incredible community, we won. I watched her speak. I watched the tears roll down her cheeks on cue. I watched the donors dab their eyes and reach for their checkbooks. And I realized I had no memory of ever being told I was going to die. After the gala I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed in my apartment, the apartment my mother paid for, in the building my mother owned, and I stared at the ceiling. Something was wrong. Something had always been wrong. I just hadn't been allowed to see it. The next morning I did something I had never done before. I requested my own medical records. My mother had always handled everything medical. She scheduled the appointments, talked to the doctors, filled the prescriptions. When I turned 18, she explained that she had medical power of attorney because of my cognitive difficulties from the chemotherapy. I never questioned it. I never questioned anything she told me. But I was 24 years old and I had a legal right to my own records. Took 3 weeks. I had to submit forms, verify my identity, wait for processing. My mother called me every day during those 3 weeks, checking in, asking how I was feeling, reminding me to take my supplements. The supplements she'd been giving me since I was a child. The supplements that always made me feel slightly nauseous, slightly weak, slightly dependent. I stopped taking them while I waited for the records. Within 5 days, I felt better than I had in my entire life. The medical records arrived on a Tuesday. A thick manila envelope from St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, where my mother claimed I had been treated for 4 years. I opened it at my kitchen table with shaking hands. The file was thin. Too thin for a 4-year cancer battle. I read every page. Emergency room visits for vomiting, for fatigue, for mysterious fevers. Lab work showing elevated levels of arsenic, thallium, and other heavy metals. Notes from doctors expressing concern about unusual presentation and inconsistent symptom patterns. A referral to a toxicologist that was never followed up on. And not a single mention of leukemia. Not a single biopsy. Not a single oncology consultation. Not a single chemotherapy session. I had never had cancer. I sat at that kitchen table for 3 hours, reading and rereading the same pages. My entire life was a lie. Every hospital visit, every fundraiser, every pitying look from strangers who admired my bravery. All of it was built on something that never existed. But if I never had cancer, why was I always sick? The answer was in the lab work. Arsenic, thallium, heavy metals that don't appear in a child's bloodstream by accident. Heavy metals that cause nausea, fatigue, hair loss, and cognitive impairment. Heavy metals that someone had to put there. I called a toxicologist the next day, Dr. Amara Okonkwo at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. I told her I needed a full panel, that I suspected I had been exposed to toxic substances, that I needed to know what was in my body. She ran the tests. 3 days later, she called me into her office with a look on her face I will never forget. "Celeste," she said, "your current levels are low, almost normal. But your hair sample analysis shows chronic exposure to arsenic over at least 15 years. The pattern is consistent with deliberate, controlled poisoning. Someone has been giving you small doses, not enough to kill you but enough to keep you sick." She paused. "Do you have any idea who would have access to your food and medication for that long?" I knew. I had always known, somewhere in the part of my brain my mother had taught me to ignore. "My mother," I said. "My mother has been poisoning me." Dr. Okonkwo was a mandatory reporter. She called the police that afternoon. Detective Marcus Tillman from the Memphis Police Department's Special Victims Unit met me at the hospital. He was a big man, mid-50s, with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much. I handed him the medical records. I handed him the toxicology report. I handed him 15 years of my life in a folder. His face changed as he read. It went from professional neutrality to disbelief to something that looked almost like grief. "Ms. Monroe," he said, "I've worked this unit for 22 years. I've seen a lot of bad things. But this..." He shook his head. "We're going to need to investigate your mother's charity." The investigation took 4 months. 4 months of forensic accountants, medical experts, and FBI agents digging through the Celeste Light Foundation. For months of me living in a hotel room under an assumed name while my mother went on television crying about how her daughter had been manipulated by people who want to destroy our family. For months of learning how deep the lie went. The foundation had raised $2.3 million over 15 years. My mother had paid herself a salary of $180,000 per year as executive director. She had used foundation funds to buy the building where I lived, the car I drove, the clothes I wore. She had used my suffering she manufactured, to build a lifestyle. But the money wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the medical records the FBI subpoenaed from doctors my mother had taken me to outside the St. Jude system. Doctors who weren't asking questions. Doctors who prescribed medications based on symptoms my mother described, not symptoms they observed. One doctor had prescribed anti-nausea medication for my chemotherapy side effects. I had never had chemotherapy. Another doctor had prescribed pain medication for my bone pain from cancer treatment. I had never had cancer treatment. My mother had been doctor shopping for 15 years, collecting prescriptions for a disease I didn't have, using the medications to justify the symptoms she was causing with the poison. It was a closed loop of abuse. Poison me to create symptoms. Use symptoms to get prescriptions. Use prescriptions to explain the poisoning. Use the whole package to raise money from strangers who believed they were saving a child's life. I was never a cancer survivor. I was a prisoner. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning in February. I watched from an unmarked police car as detectives knocked on my mother's door. The door of the house I grew up in. The house where she had shaved my head and taken photos of me looking sick. The house where she had stirred arsenic into my breakfast for 2 decades. She came out in handcuffs, still wearing her silk robe. Her face a mask of disbelief. She looked around the street, at the neighbors watching from their porches, at the news vans already gathering at the corner. Then she saw me in the car. Our eyes met. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look ashamed. She looked betrayed. Like I was the one who had done something wrong. Like I had ruined everything by refusing to stay sick. That look told me everything I needed to know about who my mother really was. The trial was national news. Munchausen mom. The cancer charity fraud that fooled America. My face was everywhere. The childhood photos from the galas, the grown woman testifying against her own mother. I told the jury everything. The supplements that made me sick. The doctors who never examined me properly. The locked medicine cabinet I was never allowed to open. The way my mother's eyes would light up when a donation came in. When a news crew wanted an interview. When strangers stopped us on the street to tell us how inspiring we were. I told them about the day I found the arsenic. It was during the investigation, after my mother had been arrested but before the trial. The FBI had given me access to the house to collect my belongings. I went into my mother's bathroom, the one room I was never allowed to enter as a child. In the cabinet under the sink, hidden behind cleaning supplies, I found a lockbox. Inside were 3 bottles. One was labeled as a dietary supplement. The others had no labels at all. The FBI tested them. One contained arsenic. One contained thallium. One contained ipecac, a substance that induces vomiting. My mother had kept her pharmacy of poisons 15 feet from where I slept for 18 years. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Vivian Monroe guilty on 14 counts. Aggravated child abuse, fraud, money laundering, forgery, and assault with a deadly weapon. The judge called it one of the most disturbing cases of maternal abuse I have ever encountered. She was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. She'll be 78 when she's eligible for parole. After the sentencing, I stood outside the courthouse and faced the cameras. I didn't want to. I wanted to disappear, to go somewhere no one knew my name or my face or my mother's lies. But I had something to say. For 15 years, people donated to the Celeste Light Foundation because they believed they were helping a sick child. They were generous and kind and good. My mother exploited that goodness. But the impulse behind those donations, the desire to help, to heal, to make a difference, that was real. That was beautiful. I paused. This was the hard part. If you donated to my mother's charity, I'm sorry. I'm sorry your kindness was stolen. But I'm asking you not to let this stop you from giving. There are real children with real cancer who need real help. Don't let my mother's crime make you cynical. Let it make you careful. Ask questions. Verify claims. But please keep giving. The world needs more people like you, not fewer. The foundation was dissolved. The remaining funds, about $340,000, were distributed to legitimate childhood cancer charities. I didn't keep a penny of it. I didn't want anything that had been purchased with my suffering. I moved to Portland, Oregon. I changed my name. I got a job at a bookstore, then a library, then a nonprofit that helps adults who aged out of foster care. I started therapy with a specialist in complex trauma. I learned words like Munchausen by proxy, and coercive control, and manufactured illness. I learned that I wasn't alone, that there were other children whose parents had made them sick for attention, for money, for the feeling of being needed. I learned that healing was possible, even when the wound came from the person who was supposed to protect you. My mother writes me letters from prison. I've never opened one. I don't know what she says in them: apologies, explanations, justifications, more lies. I don't care. She had 22 years to tell me the truth. She chose the lie every single day. I'm 30 years old now. My hair is long and thick and has never fallen out from any illness. I run 3 miles every morning. I eat food I prepare myself, in a kitchen where no one can reach my plate but me. I take no supplements. I see a doctor once a year for a checkup, and I read every word of my own medical records. I am healthy. I have always been healthy. My body was never the problem. Last month I got a call from Detective Tillman. He's retired now, but he still checks in sometimes. Thought you'd want to know, he said. Your mother's appeal was denied. She's staying where she is. I thanked him. I hung up, and for the first time in 3 years I cried. Not because I was sad. Because I was finally, completely, permanently free. My mother built her empire on the idea that I was fragile, that I needed saving, that I couldn't survive without her. She told the world I was weak so she could play the hero. She poisoned my body so she could take credit for my survival. But I did survive. Not because of her. In spite of her. And that's the only miracle anyone needs to know about. If you've ever had to break free from someone who made you believe you couldn't live without them, share your story below. And if you believe the truth always sets you free, subscribe.